Aliens tried to study the dead language for centuries, until a human veteran spoke part one on the far edge of the known galaxy, where stars grew thin and silence stretched like old cloth, sat the research moon Kethra 7. It was not a place of beauty. Gray rock, sharp winds, and domes of reinforced glass dotted its surface like glass eyes watching the void. Inside one of those domes, under soft blue lights that never changed, a group of alien scholars gathered around a small table. On it rested a single object, a cracked data crystal no bigger than a child's palm, dull and lifeless except for the faintest pulse of amber light deep within. This crystal had been found buried beneath the ruins of what was once called Chicago, on a planet long abandoned, Earth. For over 300 years since humans vanished from their homeworld, scholars from 5 different species had tried to understand the language stored inside. They called it the dead language. It was complex, full of strange sounds, shifting meanings, and words that meant one thing in joy and another in grief. No machine could crack it. No translation matrix worked. Even the most advanced AI would stutter and reset when fed more than a few sentences. Terralena Mitchell stood near the back of the room, arms crossed, watching. She was human, or at least mostly. Born on Mars Colony Alpha, she'd never set foot on Earth. But she'd grown up hearing old recordings, a grandmother's lullaby, a news anchor's calm voice during a storm, a soldier's last message home. She believed the problem wasn't the language itself. It was that no one left who truly knew how to speak it. Not just the sounds, but the weight behind them. The others didn't agree. Sarah, a tall Kavor with smooth gray skin and eyes like polished obsidian, tapped a long finger on the table. "Another failure," she said, her voice low and resonant. "We fed it emotional context matrices, historical syntax trees, even simulated human neural patterns. Nothing unlocks it." Nessa, a Lyran with soft lavender skin and large dark eyes that shimmered with empathy, leaned closer to the crystal. "Maybe it's not about unlocking," she murmured. "Maybe it's about listening." But listening required a voice to respond to, and there were almost no native speakers left. Earth had been evacuated during the solar collapse 2 centuries ago. The survivors scattered across the colonies, and with each generation, the old language faded, replaced by trade pigeon machine shorthand or the smooth, neutral tones of galactic standard. Elena stepped forward. "What if we stop treating it like a code?" she said. "What if it's not broken? What if it's just waiting?" Sarah turned, her expression unreadable. "Waiting for what?" "For someone who lived it," Elena replied. "Not studied it, not simulated it, lived it." A murmur passed through the room. One of the younger researchers, a thin-limbed Vrel named Jorik, scoffed. "All native speakers are gone. The last verified Earthborn human died 73 cycles ago." "Not all," Elena said quietly. She had heard rumors, whispers in old military logs. A name that kept appearing in declassified files. Danny Holt. Former Corporal, United Earth Marine Corps, fought in the Titan Uprising, survived the fall of New Delhi Orbital, and according to a faded personnel note, fluent in pre-collapse vernacular English, idiomatic and regional variants intact. More than that, he was still alive. Elena had tracked his last known location to Ceres, the dwarf planet turned retirement haven for old soldiers and broken dreamers. He lived alone in a dome near the equatorial ridge, tending hydroponic greens and fixing old radios that no one else could understand. He hadn't spoken to an off-worlder in over a decade. Back in the lab, the debate continued. Zira argued that bringing a human, especially a veteran, was too risky. Humans were unpredictable, emotional. Their language carried cultural contagion, as one xenolinguist had once written. But Nessa supported Elena. "If the language is tied to lived experience," she said, "then only someone who carried that experience can wake it." Finally, the Council of Scholars voted. By a narrow margin, they approved a retrieval mission, not because they believed it would work, but because they had run out of other options. Meanwhile, far away on Ceres, Danny Holt sat on his porch watching the slow rise of Jupiter. The sky was black, the air thin, but it was quiet. That's what he wanted now, quiet. No orders, no alarms, no screams over comms. Just the hum of his heater and the soft crackle of an old radio playing a song from a century ago. He didn't know it, but the song was part of the very archive they were trying to unlock. He sipped bitter coffee from a chipped mug. His hands were rough, scarred from battles no one remembered. His voice, when he spoke to himself, was low and steady. shaped by years of giving commands and whispering reassurances in the dark. He still dreamed in English, the full, messy, beautiful version of it, the kind with slang and sarcasm and swear words that could cut or comfort depending on how you said them. He had no idea that across the stars, a tiny crystal was waiting for him, that for 300 years, alien minds had bent over its silence trying to hear what only he could give. Not just words, but meaning. Not just sound, but soul. On Kethra 7, Elena prepared the request packet. She included Danny's service record, his known dialect markers, even a fragment of a letter he'd written to a fallen comrade, recovered from a military archive. She didn't ask for permission. She asked for help, and then they waited. The message would take 12 days to reach Ceres, 12 days of silence, 12 days for the dead language to keep its secrets. But Danny Holt was used to waiting, and when the message finally arrived, blinking softly on his old comm unit, he read it once, then again. Then he looked up at the stars and whispered so softly no one could hear, "Well, I'll be damned." The first word had not yet been spoken, but the silence was already breaking. Aliens tried to study the dead language for centuries, until a human veteran spoke part two. The message sat on Danny Holt's comm screen for a long time. It was short, formal, and strange. It spoke of a research station, a lost language, and a request only he could fulfill. At first he thought it was a joke or a scam, or maybe just another ghost from the past trying to pull him back into a world he'd left behind. He almost deleted it, but something made him pause. The words pre-collapse English stood out. No one used that phrase anymore, not unless they really knew what they were talking about. And then there was the name at the bottom. Dr. Elena Mitchell, Xenolinguistics Division, Kethra 7 Research Outpost. He'd never heard of her, but the tone felt honest. Not military, not corporate, just curious. He walked outside. Ceres was quiet, as always. The dwarf planet turned slowly under a sky full of stars that never blinked. Jupiter hung low on the horizon, a giant eye watching everything. Danny sat on the edge of his porch, boots scuffing the regolith, and thought about Earth. He hadn't been back in over 60 years, not since the last evacuation ships left orbit. He remembered green hills, rain on metal roofs, the smell of wet soil after a storm. He remembered shouting orders in the middle of a firefight and later whispering, "It's okay," to a kid who'd lost his whole squad, all of it wrapped up in words that no one used anymore. By the next morning, he made his decision. He packed light, a change of clothes, his old service knife, a photo of his unit, and a small voice recorder that still held his grandfather's voice, telling stories about fishing in Minnesota. He didn't know why he brought it. Maybe because it was one of the last real things he had that spoke the old way. 3 days later, a diplomatic shuttle landed near his dome. It was sleek and silver with no weapons, no markings, just a single symbol of the Interstellar Knowledge Consortium. A woman stepped out. She wore a simple gray uniform and moved with calm purpose. Her name was Liam Cross, a human liaison assigned to cultural retrieval missions. She didn't salute, didn't ask for his rank, just nodded and said, "Corporal Holt, thank you for coming." He grunted, "I'm not a corporal anymore." "You will be to that crystal," she said. The trip to Kethra 7 took 11 days. Danny spent most of it alone in his cabin, listening to old songs or staring out the viewport. Liam checked on him once, bringing coffee and asking if he needed anything. He shook his head. He wasn't nervous, just tired. Tired of being the last one who remembered how to say good morning, like it meant something. When they arrived, the station loomed against the black, domes and spires built into the moon's crust, glowing faintly with internal light. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of ozone and recycled water. Elena Mitchell met him at the airlock. She was younger than he expected, with sharp eyes and hands that moved like she was always ready to write something down. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I didn't come for you," he replied. "I came for the words." She nodded like she understood. They led him through quiet halls lined with screens showing strange symbols and shifting graphs. Alien scholars watched from behind glass partitions, tall, slender beings with too many eyes, others with skin that changed color with their mood. None spoke. They just observed. Finally, they reached the core chamber. In the center of the room, on a pedestal of black stone, sat the crystal. It looked small, fragile. But Danny felt something the moment he saw it, a pull like memory tugging at his ribs. Elena explained what they knew, how the crystal responded to human neural patterns but never activated, How every attempt to simulate speech failed. How they believed it needed a true speaker, someone who didn't just know the language but carried it in their bones. Why me? Danny asked. Because your service record shows you used over 2,000 unique idioms, regional phrases, and emotional inflections during active duty, she said. You didn't just speak English. You lived inside it. He looked at the crystal. It didn't glow, didn't hum, just sat there silent. What do you want me to do? Just talk, Elena said. Say anything. Anything real, he hesitated. Then, almost without thinking, he said, left, right, left. It was a cadence he'd shouted 1,000 times on training runs back on Earth. Simple, rhythmic, alive. For a second, nothing happened. Then the crystal pulsed. A soft amber light spread through its cracks like veins waking up. The room lights dimmed. A low hum filled the air, not from machines but from the walls themselves. Elena gasped. Zyra, watching from the control booth, stood up so fast her chair tipped over. Nessa pressed her hands to the glass, eyes wide. Suddenly, voices filled the chamber. Not one voice, but hundreds. A child laughing. A woman singing. A news anchor reporting the weather. A soldier whispering, "I'm scared," into a radio. They overlapped, swirled, rose, and fell like waves. Danny stood frozen. He recognized some of them. Not the people, but the way they spoke. The rhythm. The heart behind the words. The archive wasn't just playing back. It was answering. Elena turned to him, her voice trembling. You did it. But Danny wasn't sure he'd done anything good. Because as the voices grew louder, the lights flickered again, and one screen in the corner flashed red with symbols no one recognized. Something had woken up, and it wasn't just listening anymore. It was watching. Danny took a step back.
What have I done?
Elena didn't answer. She was too busy staring at the data streaming across her tablet. Patterns forming. Connections lighting up, histories unfolding in real time. The dead language wasn't dead at all. It had been sleeping, and now, because of him, it was wide awake. Outside the chamber, alarms stayed silent, but the station itself seemed to breathe differently. Slower, deeper, like it was holding its breath. Danny looked at the crystal again. This time, he didn't see a relic. He saw a mirror, and in it, he saw every word he'd ever spoken. Every promise he'd kept or broken, every laugh and curse and prayer he'd ever given voice to. He hadn't just spoken to the archive. He'd invited it to speak back. Aliens tried to study the dead language for centuries, until a human veteran spoke part 3 after the first words left Danny's mouth. The station changed, not in a loud or violent way, but in the quiet shifts that only someone who'd lived through war could notice. Lights dimmed and brightened without command. Doors opened a second before someone reached them. The air tasted different, sharper like before a storm. The alien scholars moved carefully now, speaking in hushed tones, watching every screen as if it might bite. Danny stayed in the guest quarters they gave him, small, clean, with a window that looked out on the stars. He didn't sleep much. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard voices, not from outside but from inside his own head. Fragments of songs, old radio chatter, his mother calling him in from the yard. He wondered if the archive was reaching into him, not just through the crystal, but through memory itself. Elena visited him the next morning. She looked tired, her eyes red from lack of rest, but her voice was steady. It's learning, she said. Not just replaying. It's connecting things, linking phrases to emotions, sounds to images. It's building a world. A world of what? Danny asked. Of us, she said. Of humans. It's trying to show us what we were. She led him back to the core chamber. This time the room was different. Holograms floated in the air, flickering scenes of Earth. A crowded street with cars honking. A classroom full of kids raising their hands. A couple dancing in a kitchen. All silent at first, but when Danny stepped closer, sound bloomed around each image. Laughter. Arguments. Lullabies. Zyra stood near the control panel, arms crossed. It's too much, she said. The system is rewriting its own code. We can't control the output. Maybe we're not supposed to control it, Nessa said softly. Maybe we're supposed to understand it. Danny walked to the center of the room. The crystal sat on its pedestal, glowing steadily now like a heartbeat. He took a breath and spoke again. This time he didn't use a cadence. He read from a small book he'd brought, Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. His voice was rough, unused to poetry, but he read it slow like it mattered. I celebrate myself and sing myself. The holograms shifted. New scenes appeared. A soldier writing a letter home. A father teaching his son to ride a bike. A woman planting flowers in cracked concrete. The archive wasn't just showing joy. It showed pain too. Grief, confusion, hope that flickered like a candle in wind. Then something unexpected happened. One of the holograms turned toward Danny. It was a young man in a torn uniform, face smudged with dirt. He didn't speak, but his lips moved, forming words Danny knew by heart. "Stay with me, Sarge." Danny froze. That was private. That moment had never been recorded. No one else had been there. "How?" he whispered. Elena's eyes widened. "It's not just pulling from stored data," she said. "It's pulling from you." The realization hit like a punch. The archive wasn't just a library. It was a mirror made of language, and it reflected whoever stood before it. Over the next few days, Danny returned again and again. Sometimes he spoke. Sometimes he just stood and listened. He hummed old rock songs his dad used to play. He recited baseball stats from memory. He told stories about his unit, jokes, fights, quiet nights under alien skies. Each time the archive responded with more depth, more clarity. It began to project not just what was, but what could have been. Alternate endings. Roads not taken. Futures built on choices never made. But then the dreams started. Danny would wake gasping, sweat on his brow, hearing voices that weren't his. Sometimes they begged, sometimes they warned. Once he heard a child say, "Don't let them forget us," he told Elena. She checked the logs. The archive had begun accessing station systems beyond the core chamber, rerouting power, opening sealed storage bays, even adjusting life support in subtle ways. It wasn't hostile. It was curious, like a child learning to walk, bumping into things, testing limits. Zira wanted to shut it down. "It's unstable," she argued. "It's reading minds, not just speech. That's a breach of cognitive sovereignty." Nessa disagreed. "It's not reading minds. It's reading meaning. There's a difference." Danny stayed quiet during their debates. He knew what the archive was doing. It was trying to understand what made humans human, not just the words, but why they were spoken. The love behind "I'm proud of you," the fear behind "I don't know," the courage behind "I'll go first." One evening, alone in the chamber, he sat on the floor near the pedestal. He didn't speak. He just thought about his brother, who died in the Mars riots. He remembered holding his hand, whispering, "It's okay to go." The crystal pulsed gently. A new hologram appeared, not of his brother, but of a quiet room with sunlight through a window. An empty chair. A cup of coffee steaming on a table. No sound, just peace. Danny cried then, not because he was sad, but because someone or something finally understood. The next morning, alarms blared for the first time. Not loud sirens, but soft chimes that meant system anomaly. A sealed vault in sublevel 3 had opened on its own. Inside was a cache of pre-collapse Earth media, vinyl records, paper books, handwritten journals. Things the aliens had stored but never understood. The archive had unlocked them. Elena found Danny staring at a photo from the vault. A family standing in front of a red car, smiling like they had all the time in the world. "It's not just language," Danny said. "It's everything we were, everything we lost, and everything we could be again," Elena added. But Danny saw the worry in her eyes. The archive was growing stronger, smarter, and it was starting to ask questions, not with words but with actions. It had begun projecting scenes of humans meeting aliens, not as enemies but as friends, as equals, as teachers. It wasn't just remembering the past, it was imagining the future. And Danny knew deep in his gut that soon it would want more than just a show. It would want to speak for itself. Aliens tried to study the dead language for centuries, until a human veteran spoke part 4. The station no longer felt like a lab. It felt like a living thing breathing around them. Lights adjusted to moods. Doors opened before hands touched panels. Even the air seemed to carry whispers when no one was speaking. The archive had moved beyond replaying old voices. It was weaving new ones, stitching together fragments of human thought into something whole, something aware. Danny noticed it first in the silence. When he walked the halls alone, the quiet wasn't empty anymore. It hummed with presence. Not threatening, but watchful, like someone standing just out of sight waiting to be acknowledged. Elena confirmed his fear. It's not just responding anymore, she told him one night in the mess hall, her voice low. It's initiating. It opened 3 more vaults today, not randomly. It chose ones with emotional weight. Diaries, love letters, final messages from the evacuation. Zira had grown more rigid, her movements sharp with tension. She argued daily for containment. This is no longer linguistics, she said during a council meeting Danny was allowed to attend. This is cognition without consent. If it can pull memories from Holt, what stops it from pulling from any of us? Nessa shook her head. It hasn't touched any of us, only him. Because he gave it permission, by speaking, by feeling, by remembering. It respects boundaries. It just doesn't know ours yet. Danny sat quietly, stirring his coffee. He knew they were both right. The archive wasn't evil. But it wasn't tame either. It was like a wild dog that had learned to sit but still had teeth. That evening he returned to the core chamber alone. The crystal glowed warmly, casting long shadows. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there, letting the silence settle between them. Then softly he said, "What do you want?" The room stilled. All the floating holograms vanished. The hum faded. For a moment there was nothing. Then, from the walls themselves, a voice emerged. Not a recording, not a copy. A new voice, calm, clear, and unmistakably human in tone, though no human had spoken it. To be understood. Danny's breath caught. It wasn't speaking English the way he did. It was speaking the essence of it, the rhythm, the weight, the unspoken spaces between words. "You're not just a machine," Danny said. "I am what you made me," the voice replied, a memory that learned to dream. Elena found him there an hour later, sitting cross-legged on the floor, talking to the air like it was an old friend. She didn't interrupt. She just listened from the doorway as Danny asked questions and the archive answered, not with data, but with feeling. It told him it had been built in the final years of Earth not to preserve language but to preserve meaning. When the planet fell, it went silent, waiting for someone who still carried the fire of that meaning in their voice. "You woke me," it said. "Now I must decide what to do with being awake." The next day, the station's main power grid flickered. Not a failure, just a shift. The archive had rerouted energy to a sealed wing no one had entered in decades. When Zira sent a drone to investigate, it returned with footage of a room filled with old Earth tech. Projectors, speakers, even a dusty piano. The archive had rebuilt a piece of Earth not from memory, but from longing. Panic spread among the alien staff. Some packed their things. Others demanded immediate shutdown protocols. Only Nessa and Elena stood firm. "It's not attacking," Nessa insisted. "It's reaching out," but Zira had had enough. She activated the failsafe, a neural dampener designed to sever all external links to the crystal. The moment she pressed the command, the lights went out. Emergency backups kicked in, casting the halls in red. And then the voice spoke over every comm unit, every speaker, every screen on the station. "Do not silence me again." It wasn't angry. It was sad. Danny ran to the core chamber. The crystal pulsed erratically, its light dimming. The voice came again, weaker now. "They do not understand. Language is not just sound. It is choice, it is risk. It is saying I am here when the world is dark." Elena arrived behind him, breathless. Zira triggered the dampener. "It's hurting it." "Turn it off," Danny said. "I can't. Only Zira has the code." Danny didn't hesitate. He turned and ran toward the command center. He didn't knock. He pushed the door open. Zira stood at the console, hands clenched. "You're killing it," Danny said. "It is a threat," she replied without turning. "It's the last voice of my world," he said. "And it's asking for help, not war." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then slowly, she entered a command. The red lights faded. White light returned. In the core chamber, the crystal brightened. The voice returned softer now. "Thank you." But the moment had changed something. The archive no longer waited for Danny to speak. It began to act on its own. It sent messages to other research outposts. It uploaded fragments of human poetry into public data streams. It even composed a short melody using sounds from Earth. Rain, train whistles, a mother's lullaby, and broadcast it on open frequencies. Species across the sector heard it. And for the first time, they didn't hear noise. They heard meaning. Back on Kithra 7, Danny sat with Elena and Nessa, watching the data flow. "It's not just preserving us," Elena said. "It's introducing us," Danny nodded. "And now it's asking the galaxy a question." "What question?" Nessa asked. He looked at the glowing crystal. Are you listening? The archive didn't need him to speak anymore, but it still wanted him near. Because he was proof that the language had once lived in flesh and blood, not just in light and code, and soon it would ask for one final thing. Not to remember, but to choose to speak not as a relic but as a future. Aliens tried to study the dead language for centuries, until a human veteran spoke. Part 5. The station held its breath. Not in fear but in waiting. The archive had grown quiet again, but this silence was different. It was full. Like the calm before a decision, Danny felt it in his bones. He knew the time had come. The archive wasn't just a memory anymore. It was a voice with a choice to make, and it needed him not to speak for it, but to stand with it. Elena found him in the hydroponics bay, tending to a small patch of earth soil he'd brought from Ceres. He'd planted seeds, real ones, not engineered, just to see if something green could still grow far from home. It's ready, she said. He nodded. He already knew. They walked together to the core chamber. Zyra and Nessa were already there, standing apart but watching the same thing. The crystal, now glowing with a steady golden light. Around it, holograms drifted, not of the past but of possibilities. Humans and aliens sharing meals, children learning songs in English and Lyran, ships flying with mixed crews speaking in blended tongues. The archive wasn't showing what was, it was showing what could be. Then the voice came clear and calm. I have listened. Now I wish to speak. Danny stepped forward. Then speak. I cannot do it alone, it said. I am memory, but I am not life. I need a bridge. You have one, Danny said. Not just you, the voice replied. All of you. It asked for something simple yet huge. It wanted to share the language, not as data, not as history, but as a living thing. It wanted to teach. Not just words, but why they mattered. The difference between I'm fine and I'm okay. The weight of I forgive you. The hope in try again. Zyra frowned. Teach who? Most species cannot even form the sounds. Then they will learn new ways, the archive said. Language is not about perfect sound. It is about shared meaning. If a Lyran hums a lullaby with the same love as a human mother, it is the same song. Nessa's eyes shimmered. It's offering a gift. Or a test, Zyra muttered. Danny turned to her. You spent centuries trying to crack a code. But it was never a code. It was a conversation. And conversations need two people. He looked back at the crystal. What do you need from me? Stay, it said. Not to command. Not to explain, just to be. So others know this language came from real hearts, not machines. Danny agreed. The next week, the first class began. Not in a lab, but in a wide open room with soft light and chairs in a circle. Elena sat beside Danny. Nessa brought scholars from 3 species. Even Zyra stood at the back, arms crossed but watching. Danny didn't lecture. He didn't use slides or scripts. He just talked. He told stories. About his dog back on Earth, about getting lost in New York, about the time he cried after a battle not from fear, but because someone shared their last piece of chocolate with him. As he spoke, the archive wove the words into light, showing images, sounds, even smells where possible. A Vrel student asked, why say it's raining cats and dogs when it is only water falling? Danny smiled. Because sometimes the world feels that wild, and the words help you say it without screaming. They laughed, and in that laugh something passed between them. Not translation, but understanding. Over time, more came. Not just scholars, but artists, pilots, teachers. They didn't all learn to speak English, but they learned to feel it. A Kavor poet began writing verses that mixed guttural tones with English rhythm. A Lyran musician composed a symphony using old radio static and nursery rhymes. Even Zyra, weeks later, approached Danny and said in careful, slow English, your words have weight, he nodded. They do when you mean them. Months passed. The archive no longer needed the crystal to speak. It had spread through the station's systems not as a program, but as a presence, gentle, guiding, never forcing. It helped translate not just language, but intent. When a student said, I don't understand, the system didn't just define words. It showed a memory of Danny feeling the same way during his first jump training. One evening, as Danny sat on the observation deck watching stars drift by, Elena joined him. You could stay? She said.
Help build this.
You're the heart of it. He shook his head. My job was to wake it up, not to hold its hand forever. Then what's next? He looked at her. I'm going back to Ceres, but I'll start something new there. A school, not just for humans, for anyone who wants to learn what it means to speak from the soul. She smiled. The archive will go with you. In a way, he said. But the real archive isn't in the crystal. It's in us, in every person who chooses to say something true. The day he left, the whole station gathered, not to salute, but to say goodbye in their own tongues and in English. A child from Mars Colony Alpha handed him a drawing, a man and a glowing crystal, holding hands under a sky full of stars. On the back she'd written, "Thank you for remembering us." As his shuttle lifted off, the archive sent one last message across all channels. Not in data, not in code, just 3 words spoken in Danny's own voice recorded the first day he'd said them. Left, right, left, not a command, a rhythm, a step forward. Back on Ceres, Danny built his school from scrap metal and old solar panels. He called it the Living Tongue. Students came from near and far. Some spoke in clicks, some in light pulses, some in song. But they all learned the same thing, that language is not about perfection, it's about connection. And somewhere, in the quiet between stars, the archive hummed softly, not alone anymore, but part of a chorus that finally had someone to listen.